The morning mist hung low over the Gloucestershire countryside as Detective Inspector Marcus Fletcher adjusted his uniform and checked his watch for the third time. At 42, Marcus had spent 20 years serving the Crown in various capacities, but today felt different. Today, he was being sent to investigate unusual activities at one of Queen Camilla's private estates, activities that had caught the attention of palace security. Marcus had received the call at dawn. A series of strange lights had been reported coming from the abandoned wing of Rayfield Manor, one of Camilla's lesser-known properties. Local villagers claimed they'd seen figures moving through the gardens at odd hours, and there were whispers of items being removed under cover of darkness. The palace was concerned enough to send someone they trusted implicitly. As Marcus drove through the ornate gates of Rayfield Manor, he couldn't help but admire the sprawling Georgian mansion that stretched before him. The estate had been in royal hands for over 2 centuries, though it had remained largely unused since Queen Elizabeth's passing. The main house stood 3 stories tall, its honey-colored stone walls covered partially by ancient ivy. Formal gardens extended in every direction, though they showed signs of recent neglect. Marcus parked his unmarked vehicle near the main entrance and was greeted by Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the estate's longtime caretaker. Eleanor was a woman in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She had worked at various royal properties for over 40 years and commanded respect from everyone who knew her. "Inspector Fletcher, I presume?" Eleanor said, extending a firm handshake. "I must say, I'm relieved you're here. Strange things have been happening, and, frankly, I'm at my wit's end." Marcus followed Eleanor into the grand foyer, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceiling roses, and portraits of long-dead royals gazed down from gilded frames. Despite the grandeur, there was an underlying sense of sadness about the place, as if the building itself mourned the absence of its former occupants. "Tell me about these unusual activities," Marcus said, pulling out his notebook as they walked through a corridor lined with ancient tapestries. Eleanor wrung her hands nervously. "It started about 3 weeks ago. I live in the groundskeeper's cottage about half a mile away, and I noticed lights in the east wing, the section that's been sealed off since Her late Majesty's passing. At first, I thought it might be electrical problems, but the power to that wing was disconnected months ago." They paused in front of tall wooden doors that had been sealed with official tape bearing the royal coat of arms. Eleanor produced a set of keys from her pocket, her hands shaking slightly as she unlocked the doors. "Her late Majesty used this wing as her private retreat when she stayed here," Eleanor explained. "She would come here when she needed to think, to be away from the pressures of the palace. After she passed, Queen Camilla ordered it sealed until decisions could be made about the contents." As the doors swung open, Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The hallway beyond was shrouded in dust sheets, creating ghostly silhouettes of furniture and artwork. Weak sunlight filtered through heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Eleanor led him through the wing, pointing out various rooms. "There's the library where she would read for hours, the small dining room where she took her private meals, and her personal study. But the strangest thing is, some of the dust sheets have been disturbed. Items have been moved." Marcus examined the areas Eleanor indicated. Indeed, there were footprints in the dust, fresh ones that couldn't have been made by Eleanor, whose movements were careful and deliberate. Someone had been here recently, and they'd been searching for something. "Has anyone else had access to this wing?" Marcus asked, photographing the footprints with his phone. "Absolutely not," Eleanor replied firmly. "I have the only keys, and I haven't given them to anyone. Queen Camilla specifically instructed that nothing was to be touched until she could personally oversee an inventory." They continued their exploration, moving from room to room. Each space told a story of Queen Elizabeth's private life. Her favorite books still bookmarked, her reading glasses on a side table, a half-finished crossword puzzle on her desk. It was like stepping into a moment frozen in time. In the study, Marcus noticed something that made him pause. A large painting of a pastoral scene hung slightly askew on the wall. The dust pattern around it suggested it had been moved recently. He carefully lifted the frame and discovered a small safe built into the wall behind it. "Did you know about this?" Marcus asked Eleanor. The caretaker's eyes widened in surprise. "I had no idea. Her late Majesty never mentioned a safe to me." The safe was old-fashioned, requiring a combination rather than a modern electronic lock. Most concerning was that it stood wide open, completely empty. Marcus examined the interior carefully, noting scratches on the metal that suggested recent activity. Someone has been here, Marcus concluded. And they found whatever was in this safe. Eleanor clutched her chest in distress. Oh my goodness. What if they've stolen something important? Should I call Queen Camilla immediately? Not yet, Marcus advised. Let's complete our investigation first. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before alerting the palace. They spent the next 2 hours systematically examining every room in the sealed wing. Marcus documented everything with his camera and notebook, building a picture of what had occurred. The intruders had been careful, but not perfect. In addition to the disturbed dust sheets and moved furniture, he found a few other telling signs. A window latch that had been recently oiled, cigarette ash near a back entrance, and tire tracks in the soft earth of a service road that ran behind the estate. As they completed their tour and prepared to reseal the wing, Eleanor suddenly grabbed Marcus's arm. Wait, she said, her voice urgent. I just remembered something. About a week after the wing was sealed, I received a phone call. A man claiming to be from the palace's inventory department said he needed to access the wing to catalog items. I told him he needed to go through proper channels, and he hung up abruptly. Marcus made a note of this information. Can you describe the voice? Any accent or distinguishing features? He spoke well, educated, but there was something about him I didn't trust. He seemed to know too much about the estate's layout for someone who had never been here. As evening approached, Marcus concluded his initial investigation. He had enough evidence to confirm that someone had indeed broken into the sealed wing and accessed the hidden safe. What they had taken remained a mystery, but the professional nature of the break-in suggested this wasn't a random burglary. Eleanor prepared to leave for her cottage, but Marcus had one more request. I'd like to stay here tonight, he said. If our intruders return, I want to be ready for them. Are you certain that's wise? Eleanor asked with concern. These people might be dangerous. I'll be careful, Marcus assured her. But, right now, this is our best chance of catching them and recovering whatever they've taken. After Eleanor departed, Marcus settled into the main house to wait. He positioned himself in a room with a clear view of the east wing, armed with night vision binoculars and a radio to call for backup if needed. As darkness fell over the estate, he reflected on the day's discoveries. Queen Elizabeth had been known for her attention to detail and her careful preservation of royal history. What could have been so important that she kept it in a hidden safe in her private retreat? And who would risk breaking into a royal property to steal it? Around midnight, Marcus's patience was rewarded. A dark vehicle appeared on the service road, moving without headlights. 3 figures emerged and made their way toward the east wing using the same route Marcus had discovered earlier. They moved with practiced efficiency, suggesting they had done this before. Marcus watched through his binoculars as the intruders entered the wing. They carried professional equipment, metal detectors, small excavation tools, and what appeared to be scanning devices. These weren't common thieves. They were searching for something specific. One of the figures appeared to be directing the others, and Marcus caught glimpses of heated discussion between them. Whatever they were looking for, they hadn't found it in their previous visit. They spent over an hour in the wing before emerging empty-handed and clearly frustrated. As they prepared to leave, Marcus made a decision. Rather than confront them directly, he would follow them and try to learn more about their operation. He slipped out of the house and made his way to his vehicle, keeping his distance as he followed their car along winding country roads. The chase led him to a small industrial estate about 20 miles from the manor. The intruder's vehicle pulled into a warehouse that appeared to be their base of operations. Marcus parked at a safe distance and observed the building through his binoculars. What he saw made his blood run cold. The warehouse was filled with artifacts, paintings, and treasures that clearly belonged in museums or royal collections. This was no simple burglary ring. This was a sophisticated operation dealing in stolen historical artifacts. Marcus photographed everything he could see and made detailed notes. As dawn approached, he realized he had stumbled upon something much larger than a simple break-in at a royal estate. This was an organized network trafficking in priceless historical items, and somehow Queen Elizabeth's private retreat had become their latest target. But what were they searching for so desperately? And, more importantly, had they already found it, or was it still hidden somewhere in the sealed wing of Rayfield Manor? As Marcus drove back to the estate, he knew that his investigation was just beginning. Whatever Queen Elizabeth had hidden in her private safe was clearly worth risking imprisonment for, and that made it incredibly valuable, or incredibly dangerous. The morning sun was rising over the Gloucestershire hills as Marcus returned to meet Eleanor. He had a lot of questions for the elderly caretaker, and he suspected she might know more about Queen Elizabeth's secrets than she had initially revealed. The first part of this mystery was solved. He knew who was behind the break-ins. Now he needed to discover what they were after, and why it was so important that they would risk everything to find it. Eleanor was waiting for him at the manor's main entrance, a steaming cup of tea in her hands, and worry etched across her weathered face. "Did they return?" she asked anxiously. "They did," Marcus confirmed. "And I followed them." "Eleanor, what we're dealing with here is much bigger than we initially thought. I need you to tell me everything you can remember about Queen Elizabeth's time here, especially in the months before she passed. What was she working on? What was she concerned about?" Eleanor set down her teacup and looked out across the estate's rolling grounds. She was deeply worried about preserving the monarchy's legacy. She began slowly. She spent hours going through old documents, sorting through family papers. She spoke often about ensuring that important historical items wouldn't be lost or stolen after she was gone. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. If Queen Elizabeth had been concerned about protecting royal treasures from theft, what had she hidden in that safe? And how had professional antiquities thieves learned about it? The investigation was about to take a turn that would shake the very foundations of the royal family's carefully guarded secrets. Eleanor's revelation about Queen Elizabeth's concerns lingered in Marcus's mind as they returned to the East Wing for a more thorough examination. The morning light streaming through the tall windows revealed details he had missed in his initial investigation. Eleanor moved through the rooms with the familiarity of someone who had spent years caring for every corner of the estate, and Marcus realized she was his best source of information about the late Queen's activities. "She would sit in that chair by the window for hours," Eleanor said, pointing to a worn leather armchair in the study. "She had me bring up boxes of old papers from the basement storage rooms, documents that had been stored here for decades, some dating back to King George's time." Marcus examined the chair more closely. The leather was worn smooth in places where hands had gripped the arms, and there were water stains on the side table where countless cups of tea had been placed. This was clearly where Queen Elizabeth had spent many contemplative hours in her final months. "What kind of documents?" Marcus pressed gently. "Can you describe them?" Eleanor moved to the large mahogany desk and traced her fingers along its polished surface. There were inventories, lists of royal possessions that had been stored or moved during various periods. She was particularly interested in items that had gone missing during World War II. The royal family had moved many precious things to secret locations during the bombing of London. This information sent Marcus's mind racing. During the war, countless treasures had been hidden, lost, or stolen. If Queen Elizabeth had been researching missing royal artifacts, she might have discovered the location of items that had been presumed lost forever. Did she find anything significant in these documents? Marcus asked. Eleanor hesitated, then moved to a small bookshelf in the corner of the room. She ran her finger along the spines of various volumes until she found what she was looking for, a leather-bound journal with the royal cipher embossed on its cover. "She asked me to keep this safe," Eleanor admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said if anything happened to her, I should give it to someone trustworthy who could understand its importance. I think you might be that person." Marcus accepted the journal with reverent hands. The leather was soft with age, and the pages within were filled with Queen Elizabeth's distinctive handwriting. As he began to read, he realized he was holding a record of one of the most significant discoveries in royal history. The entries detailed Queen Elizabeth's research into a collection of items that had been secretly moved from Buckingham Palace in 1940. As German bombs fell on London, the royal family had entrusted their most precious possessions to a network of loyal servants and trusted allies. These items weren't just valuable. They were irreplaceable pieces of British history. According to the journal, the collection included medieval coronation regalia that predated the current crown jewels, personal letters from monarchs spanning 5 centuries, and artwork by masters whose works were thought to be completely lost. But, most intriguingly, there were references to items with historical significance that went beyond their monetary value, documents that could reshape understanding of British history. She discovered that one of the wartime hiding places had never been revealed after the war. Eleanor explained as Marcus read. The person entrusted with the location died during a bombing raid, taking the secret with him. But she found clues in these old documents that led her to believe she could find it. Marcus looked up from the journal, his mind reeling with the implications. "Are you telling me that Queen Elizabeth discovered the location of lost royal treasures?" Eleanor nodded solemnly. She was so excited when she made the connection. She spent weeks cross-referencing documents, maps, and family records. She believed she had solved an 80-year-old mystery. The journal entries became increasingly urgent as Queen Elizabeth's research progressed. She wrote about her concerns that knowledge of these hidden treasures would die with her if she didn't act quickly. She also expressed worry that others might be searching for the same items, people with less noble intentions. One entry particularly caught Marcus's attention. "I fear I am being watched. Someone has been asking questions about my research among the palace staff. I must take precautions to protect what I have discovered. The location of the Thornberry collection must remain secret until I can arrange for its proper recovery." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The Thornberry collection. He had heard whispers of it during his years in royal service. It was a legendary cache of royal artifacts that had supposedly been lost during the war. Most experts considered it a myth, a wartime story that had grown in the telling over the decades. "The safe," Marcus said suddenly. "She put the location of the Thornberry collection in that safe, didn't she?" Eleanor's expression confirmed his suspicion. "She told me she had hidden the most important information where only someone with the right knowledge could find it. She said the combination to the safe was something that would be meaningful only to a member of the royal family." Marcus examined the safe again, looking for any clues about the combination. It was a 6-digit lock, and he considered what numbers might have been significant to Queen Elizabeth. Birth dates, coronation dates, anniversary dates. The possibilities were numerous. As he pondered the combination, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed it was his superior at the palace security office. "Fletcher, I need an update on the Rayfield situation," came the crisp voice of Commander Harrison, head of Royal Protection Services. "Queen Camilla is asking questions, and I need answers." Marcus stepped away from Eleanor to take the call privately. "Sir, the situation is more complex than initially reported. We're dealing with professional antiquities thieves, and they appear to be searching for something specific that may have belonged to Queen Elizabeth." "Explain," Harrison demanded. Marcus provided a careful summary of his discoveries, leaving out the details about the journal and the safe combination. He wasn't ready to reveal everything until he better understood what they were dealing with. "Have you informed Queen Camilla about these findings?" Harrison asked. "Not yet, sir. I wanted to complete my investigation before making any official reports." There was a pause before Harrison responded. "Fletcher, I'm going to share something with you that must remain absolutely confidential. 2 days ago, we intercepted communications suggesting that certain parties were planning to target royal properties. We believe these people have inside information about the locations of valuable items." Marcus felt a chill. "Inside information, sir? Someone with access to palace records has been feeding information to antiquities smugglers. We don't know who, but we know they're specifically interested in items connected to Queen Elizabeth's private research." This revelation changed everything. If there was a mole within the royal household, then Queen Elizabeth's precautions had been even more necessary than she had realized. Someone close to the royal family was involved in the theft of priceless historical artifacts. After ending the call, Marcus returned to Eleanor with a new sense of urgency. "We need to find what Queen Elizabeth hid before these thieves do," he told her. "Lives may depend on it." Eleanor looked puzzled. "Lives? Surely these are just valuable objects." Marcus opened the journal to one of the final entries and read aloud. "Among the Thornberry collection are documents that certain parties would kill to suppress. Evidence of events during the war that some powerful families would prefer remain buried. If these papers fall into the wrong hands, they could be used for blackmail or worse." The implications were staggering. Queen Elizabeth hadn't just been protecting valuable artifacts. She had been safeguarding dangerous secrets that could destroy reputations and possibly threaten lives even decades after the war's end. Eleanor's face grew pale as the gravity of the situation sank in. "She never told me about any dangers. She said she was preserving history, not protecting secrets that could hurt people." Marcus closed the journal and looked directly at Eleanor. "We need to work together to solve this. You knew Queen Elizabeth better than almost anyone. Help me think like she did. What would she have used as a safe combination? Something meaningful, but not obvious." Eleanor sat in the worn leather chair and closed her eyes, thinking. She often spoke about the day she became queen. Not her coronation, but the moment she learned her father had died and she would inherit the crown. She said it was the most significant moment of her life, when everything changed. Marcus pulled out his phone and searched for the date when King George VI had died. February 6, 1952. He tried 060252 on the safe's combination lock, but it didn't work. He tried various arrangements of the numbers, but none opened the safe. What else was significant to her? Marcus asked. Eleanor thought for a long moment. Her horses. She loved her horses more than almost anything. There was one in particular, a mare named Estrella, that she rode during her youth. She spoke of that horse often in her later years. This line of thinking wasn't yielding results, and Marcus was growing frustrated. The thieves had already been in the safe, so perhaps they had already found what they were looking for. But, if that were the case, why had they returned to continue searching? Wait, Eleanor said suddenly. There's something else. In her final weeks, she kept mentioning her mother's favorite prayer. She said it had guided the royal family through their darkest hours during the war. Marcus waited for Eleanor to continue. The prayer of St. Francis. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. She said it was what kept her mother strong when the palace was being bombed. Marcus counted the words in the prayer's opening line. 11 words, too many for a 6-digit combination. But perhaps there was another way to interpret it. Did she have a specific version of the prayer that was meaningful to her? Marcus asked. Eleanor nodded slowly. She often said just the first part. Make me an instrument of peace. She said those words changed her understanding of what it meant to be a monarch. Marcus counted again. 6 words. Make me an instrument of peace. If each word was represented by a number corresponding to its position in the alphabet, that might work. But that would create numbers that were too large for the combination lock. Then, he had another idea. What if each word was represented by the number of letters it contained? Make, 4, me, 2, and 2, instrument, 10, of 2, peace, 5. That gave him 422-10-2-5. Still too complex for a 6-digit lock. He tried a simpler approach. The first letter of each word converted to numbers. M, 13, M, 13, A1, I9, O, 15, P, 16. The combination would be 13-13-1-9-15-16, but that was too many digits. I'm overthinking this, Marcus muttered to himself. Eleanor had been watching his attempts with growing concern. Perhaps she was more clever than we're giving her credit for, she suggested. She always said the most secure hiding places were in plain sight. Marcus looked around the room again. What was in plain sight that they had missed? His eyes settled on a small framed photograph on the desk. Queen Elizabeth as a young princess, standing next to a horse. The horse had to be Estrella. He examined the photograph more closely and noticed something written in faded ink on the back. Estrella, my dearest friend, August 15, 1935. August 15, 1935. Marcus tried 150835 on the safe's combination lock. There was a soft click, and the safe swung open. But, instead of finding documents or treasures, Marcus found something unexpected, a small brass key, and a note in Queen Elizabeth's handwriting. The note read, "The real treasure is not what you expect, but where you would never think to look. Trust Eleanor. She knows more than she realizes." Marcus showed the note to Eleanor, who read it with growing amazement. I don't understand, she said. What could I know that I don't realize I know? The brass key was old and ornate, clearly designed for a specific lock. Marcus had seen similar keys during his years of service at various royal properties. This was the type of key used for important storage areas or private rooms in royal residences. Eleanor, Marcus said carefully, in all your years here, have you ever seen a lock that this key might fit? She examined the key closely, turning it over in her weathered hands. There are so many locks in a house this old, she said. Storage rooms, wine cellars, private chambers. But this key. She paused, a look of recognition crossing her face. What is it? Marcus pressed. The chapel, Eleanor said softly. There's a small private chapel in the basement that's been locked for years. I always assumed it was just old storage, but Queen Elizabeth specifically told me never to clean down there. She said it was off limits for everyone except family members. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. A private chapel would be the perfect place to hide something of great importance. It would be sacred space, protected not just by locks and walls but by tradition and respect. Take me there, Marcus said immediately. Eleanor led him through the main house to a narrow staircase hidden behind a door that looked like part of the paneled wall. The stairs descended into the basement levels of the manor, areas that clearly hadn't been used for decades. The air grew cooler and more still as they went deeper into the building's foundations. The chapel was small and simple, with stone walls and a vaulted ceiling. Stained glass windows near the ceiling level allowed colored light to filter into the space, creating an atmosphere of reverence and mystery. At the far end was a simple altar, and behind it, a heavy wooden door secured with an elaborate lock. Marcus inserted the brass key into the lock, and it turned smoothly. The door opened to reveal a small chamber that had clearly been designed as a repository for precious items. But what they found inside would challenge everything they thought they knew about royal history and put their own lives in immediate danger. The chamber contained not just the missing Thornberry collection, but evidence of a conspiracy that had been hidden for over 80 years, a conspiracy that powerful people would still kill to protect. The hidden chamber behind the chapel altar was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. The space was larger than it appeared from the doorway, extending back into the manor's foundations with stone archways supporting the ceiling. Ancient wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with carefully preserved documents, artifacts, and treasures that had been hidden away for decades. Eleanor gasped as their flashlight beams illuminated the contents. Gold chalices, medieval manuscripts, paintings wrapped in protective cloth, and wooden chests secured with elaborate locks filled the chamber. But what caught Marcus's attention immediately were the modern filing cabinets that sat incongruously among the historical treasures. She continued to use this space, Marcus realized aloud. Queen Elizabeth didn't just discover the wartime hiding place. She was actively using it to store sensitive materials. Eleanor moved carefully among the shelves, her eyes wide with amazement. I had no idea any of this existed. She never mentioned it, never gave me any indication that there was anything down here. Marcus approached one of the filing cabinets and found it unlocked. Inside were dozens of folders containing photographs, documents, and correspondence dating from the 1940s through to just weeks before Queen Elizabeth's death. As he began to examine the contents, he realized they were looking at evidence of a secret that had been carefully guarded for over 80 years. The first folder contained photographs from World War II that Marcus had never seen in any history book or museum. They showed meetings between British officials and representatives of various resistance movements across occupied Europe. But what made these photographs extraordinary was that they documented meetings and agreements that had never been publicly acknowledged. Eleanor, look at this, Marcus called softly. One photograph showed a young Prince Philip in military uniform, but he was meeting with individuals who were clearly not British officers. The setting appeared to be somewhere in the Mediterranean, and the date written on the back indicated it was taken in 1943. Eleanor examined the photograph carefully. I remember Her late Majesty mentioning that Prince Philip had been involved in secret operations during the war, but she always said the details were classified. Marcus continued through the files, finding documents that revealed a complex network of secret agreements and covert operations that had never been declassified. There were communications between the royal family and resistance leaders, evidence of financial support for underground movements, and, most shocking of all, documentation of collaboration between British intelligence and former Nazi officers who had been secretly recruited after the war. This explains why someone would kill to keep these secrets, Marcus murmured as he photographed the documents with his phone. Some of the people involved in these operations may still be alive, and their families certainly are. If these documents became public, it could destroy reputations and possibly reveal war crimes that were covered up. Eleanor had moved to examine the historical artifacts from the original Thornberry collection. She carefully unwrapped a painting that revealed itself to be a previously unknown work by Leonardo da Vinci, a small portrait that had been presumed destroyed during the war. My God, she whispered. This single painting is worth millions. But Marcus was more concerned with the modern implications of what they had discovered. As he continued through the files, he found evidence that Queen Elizabeth had been actively investigating recent activities connected to these wartime secrets. Someone had been trying to expose the hidden operations, and others had been working just as hard to keep them buried. One folder was labeled Current Threats, 2024, and contained correspondence between Queen Elizabeth and various security officials. The letters revealed that she had become aware of a group attempting to locate and steal the wartime documents. But more troubling was evidence that this group had connections to current members of the government and possibly the royal household itself. She knew she was in danger, Marcus said, showing Eleanor a letter dated just 2 weeks before the Queen's death. She wrote that she believed someone close to her was providing information to people who wanted to destroy these documents. Eleanor sat heavily on a wooden crate, the implications of the discovery overwhelming her. Are you saying that someone may have, that her death might not have been natural? Marcus had been wondering the same thing, but he wasn't ready to voice that suspicion yet. The official cause of Queen Elizabeth's death had been old age and declining health. But the timing was remarkably convenient for people who wanted these secrets to remain buried. We need to be very careful about who we trust with this information, Marcus said. If there really is someone in the royal household working with these antiquities thieves, then reporting this through normal channels could be dangerous. As Marcus continued his examination of the files, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Commander Harrison again, and Marcus hesitated before answering. Could Harrison be trusted, or was he part of the conspiracy? Fletcher, where are you? Harrison's voice was urgent. We've received intelligence that the thieves you're tracking are planning something major. They may be targeting Queen Camilla directly. Marcus felt his blood run cold. What kind of threat, sir? We don't have details, but intercepts suggest they believe she has access to something they want. You need to return to London immediately for debriefing. Sir, I'm in the middle of a significant discovery here. I think I've found what these thieves are looking for, and it's much more important than we realized. There was a pause before Harrison responded. Fletcher, you're to cease your investigation immediately and return to London. That's an order. The abrupt change in Harrison's tone made Marcus suspicious. Why would his superior want to stop the investigation just when they were making progress? Either Harrison was trying to protect Marcus from danger, or he was trying to protect the conspiracy from exposure. Understood, sir, Marcus said. I'll wrap up here and head back. After ending the call, Marcus turned to Eleanor with growing urgency. We need to document everything we can and get out of here. I think we're running out of time. They spent the next hour photographing documents and cataloging the most important items in the chamber. Marcus focused on the evidence of the wartime conspiracy and the modern attempts to suppress it, while Eleanor helped identify the most valuable artifacts from the original Thornberry collection. Among the items they discovered was a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be the personal diary of King George VI during the war years. The entries revealed details about secret negotiations and covert operations that painted a very different picture of how Britain had survived the darkest days of the war. These diary entries mention people who are still prominent in British society, Marcus noted as he photographed the pages. Government officials, business leaders, members of the nobility. If their families' involvement in these wartime activities became public knowledge, it could cause a political earthquake. Eleanor had found something equally disturbing. Evidence that valuable artifacts from museums across occupied Europe had been secretly acquired by British collectors during and after the war. Some of these items were now in major British museums or private collections, their true ownership carefully hidden. She was trying to right historical wrongs, Eleanor said softly. Queen Elizabeth discovered that some very respected institutions and families had built their wealth on stolen treasures, and she was planning to do something about it. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Marcus made a difficult decision. He couldn't trust normal channels with this information, which meant he needed to find another way to ensure the evidence was preserved and protected. He carefully selected the most crucial documents and hid copies in multiple locations throughout the chamber, hoping that if anything happened to the originals, the truth could still be revealed. But as they climbed the stairs from the basement chapel, they heard voices coming from the main house above. Someone had arrived at the manor, and they were searching for something or someone. Marcus motioned for Eleanor to remain quiet as they reached the top of the stairs. Through the door, they could hear at least 3 different voices, and they were speaking in the clipped, professional tones of people conducting a military operation. Search every room, came a voice that Marcus recognized with a shock. It was Commander Harrison. Fletcher is here somewhere, and he has something that belongs to us. Marcus felt sick. His own superior was part of the conspiracy, which meant that his earlier phone call had been a trap. They weren't here to protect him. They were here to stop him from exposing the truth. We know you're here, Fletcher, Harrison called out. Come out, and we can discuss this like civilized people. You're in over your head, and you don't understand the implications of what you've discovered. Eleanor looked at Marcus with fear in her eyes. She had gone from being a simple caretaker to being caught in the middle of a conspiracy that involved some of the most powerful people in Britain. Marcus squeezed her hand reassuringly and motioned toward a side passage that led to a different part of the basement. They moved quietly through the manor's service areas, Marcus drawing on his knowledge of building layouts from his years of security work. Most old houses like this had multiple ways in and out, designed originally to allow servants to move unseen throughout the building. There's a tunnel that leads to the old ice house, Eleanor whispered as they moved through a narrow corridor. It was built during the Georgian period to transport ice from the grounds to the kitchen without it melting. The tunnel was cramped and dark, but It offered them a way to escape the manor without being detected. As they crawled through the underground passage, Marcus could hear voices and footsteps above them as Harrison's team searched the house systematically. The ice house was a small stone building about 200 yards from the manor, hidden among a grove of old oak trees. From there, they could see Marcus's car parked near the main entrance, but it was clearly being watched. "We need another way out," Marcus said, assessing their options. Eleanor smiled grimly. "I've been working on royal estates for 40 years. There are always multiple escape routes." She led him to what appeared to be a garden shed, but inside was an old motorcycle that she used to travel around the estate's extensive grounds. "Can you ride?" she asked. Marcus grinned despite their dangerous situation. "I've been riding motorcycles since I was 16. As they prepared to escape on the motorcycle, Marcus made one more crucial decision. He pulled out his phone and sent encrypted messages to 3 different contacts outside the normal chain of command. A journalist he trusted who specialized in investigating government corruption, a retired MI5 officer who had helped him on previous cases, and his own brother, who worked as a barrister and could provide legal protection if needed. Each message contained a brief summary of their discoveries and the location of hidden evidence. If anything happened to Marcus and Eleanor, the truth would still have a chance of being revealed. The motorcycle engine started on the first kick, and they roared away from the ice house just as Harrison's team reached the outer buildings. Marcus could see men in dark clothing running toward the sound of the engine, but the motorcycle's head start and Eleanor's knowledge of the estate's back roads gave them the advantage they needed. As they rode through the countryside towards safety, Eleanor shouted over the engine noise, "Where are we going?" Marcus had been thinking about that. They needed somewhere safe where they could plan their next move, but nowhere connected to his official duties or Eleanor's employment history. Then, he remembered the perfect place, a small cottage owned by his retired colleague from MI5, tucked away in a remote village where they could regroup and decide how to expose the conspiracy they had uncovered. But as they rode toward their temporary sanctuary, Marcus realized that their escape from the manor was only the beginning of their troubles. Harrison knew about his investigation, which meant the entire conspiracy was now aware that their secrets had been discovered. They would use all their resources and influence to silence Marcus and Eleanor permanently. The race to expose one of the biggest cover-ups in British history had begun, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The evidence they had discovered in Queen Elizabeth's secret chamber didn't just reveal historical crimes. It implicated people who were still alive, still powerful, and still willing to kill to protect their secrets. Eleanor tightened her grip around Marcus's waist as the motorcycle carried them toward an uncertain future. She had started the day as a simple caretaker of a royal estate, but now she was a key witness in a conspiracy that could topple governments and destroy some of Britain's most prestigious families. Behind them, Harrison's team was undoubtedly organizing a manhunt that would use all the resources of the British security services. Ahead of them lay the challenge of staying alive long enough to ensure that Queen Elizabeth's final gift to history, the truth about Britain's darkest secrets, would finally see the light of day. The late Queen's legacy was now in their hands, and they were the only people standing between historical justice and the continued cover-up of crimes that had been hidden for over 80 years. The cottage where Marcus's former colleague lived sat in a valley surrounded by rolling hills and ancient stone walls. James Whitmore had retired from MI5 3 years earlier after a distinguished career investigating government corruption and organized crime. His small house was chosen specifically for its isolation and its sophisticated security systems that rivaled anything found in official government facilities. Marcus had called ahead during their ride, using coded language that James would understand. When they arrived, the older man was waiting for them with tea, sandwiches, and a grim expression that suggested he understood the gravity of their situation. "I've been monitoring police and security frequencies," James said as he showed them into his sitting room. "There's been a lot of chatter about a security breach at a royal property. They're looking for a rogue agent and an accomplice." Eleanor sank into a comfortable chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She had gone from caring for an empty manor house to running for her life in the span of 24 hours, and the stress was beginning to show. Marcus quickly briefed James on their discoveries, showing him the photographs he had taken in the secret chamber. As James examined the evidence, his expression grew increasingly serious. "This is extraordinary," James said softly. "I'd heard rumors during my career about wartime operations that never made it into the official records, but I never imagined anything on this scale. James had his own resources for investigating sensitive matters, including contacts in various intelligence agencies and access to classified archives that most people would never see. He spent the next hour making discreet inquiries while Marcus and Eleanor tried to process everything that had happened. "The situation is worse than we thought," James announced when he returned from making his phone calls. "Harrison isn't working alone. He's part of a network that includes people in the government, the security services, and several prominent families. They've been actively suppressing historical evidence for decades." Eleanor looked up from her teacup with confusion. "But why? The war ended 80 years ago. Why are these secrets still important?" James pulled out a map of Europe and spread it on his dining table. "Because some of the people involved in these wartime operations went on to become very powerful after the war. Government ministers, business leaders, heads of major corporations. Their success was built on wealth and connections that came directly from these secret operations." Marcus studied the map, which showed various locations across Europe where covert operations had taken place. "You're saying that some of Britain's most successful families built their fortunes on stolen Nazi gold and looted artwork?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," James confirmed. "And more than that, some of the former Nazi officers who were secretly recruited by British intelligence after the war were given new identities and allowed to emigrate to Britain. Their descendants are now prominent members of British society, completely unaware of their families' true histories." Eleanor stood up abruptly, pacing to the window to look out at the peaceful countryside. "This is insane. Are you telling me that people are willing to commit murder to hide the fact that their grandfathers were Nazis? Or war profiteers, or thieves, or traitors?" Marcus added grimly. "The evidence we found shows that some very respected British families were collaborating with the enemy while publicly supporting the war effort." James nodded sadly. Queen Elizabeth discovered all of this through her research, and she was planning to reveal it gradually through proper channels. But someone leaked information about her investigation to the people who wanted these secrets to remain buried. Marcus felt a chill as he realized the full implications. "Are you saying they killed her to stop the truth from coming out?" "I can't prove it," James admitted. "But the timing is remarkably convenient. She dies just weeks before she was planning to turn over her evidence to historians and government investigators." Eleanor turned from the window with tears in her eyes. "She trusted me to protect her secrets, and I failed her. I should have known something was wrong when those people started asking questions about the estate." Marcus moved to comfort her. "You couldn't have known. This conspiracy involves people at the highest levels of government and society. They have resources and connections that ordinary citizens can't compete with." But James had been thinking about their next steps. "The question now is what we do with this information. We can't trust normal law enforcement channels because we don't know how deep this conspiracy goes. But we also can't hide forever." Marcus had been considering the same problem. "We need to make the information public in a way that can't be suppressed or discredited. Multiple sources, multiple countries, multiple media outlets, all releasing the evidence simultaneously." "That's exactly right," James agreed. "But we also need to be smart about how we do it. If we just dump everything on the internet, they'll claim it's fake or that we stole it illegally. We need credible witnesses and proper authentication." Over the next few hours, they developed a plan. James would use his contacts to reach out to historians and journalists in several different countries, people who specializing in investigating wartime secrets and government cover-ups. Marcus would document everything they had found, creating multiple copies of the evidence and hiding them in various secure locations. Eleanor would provide witness testimony about Queen Elizabeth's activities and her concerns about being watched. But as they worked on their plan, James received a phone call that changed everything. "They found the cottage," James announced after hanging up. "My contact at the local police station says they've received orders to assist in a national security operation. Armed teams are being deployed to search properties in this area." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "How much time do we have?" "Maybe 30 minutes before they reach us," James estimated. "But I have a plan. There's an old mine shaft about 2 miles from here that was used by resistance fighters during World War II. It's connected to a network of tunnels that leads to a village on the other side of the hills." Eleanor gathered the evidence they had compiled while James and Marcus prepared to abandon the cottage. But James insisted on one more crucial step before they left. "We need to send the evidence now," he said, setting up his computer and satellite internet connection. "If they capture us, at least the truth will survive." Working frantically, they uploaded copies of the most important documents and photographs to secure servers in 3 different countries. James had contacts who would receive the files and understand their importance even if the original discoverers didn't survive. As sirens wailed in the distance, they finished their preparations and headed for the mine shaft. The entrance was hidden among a grove of trees and looked like nothing more than a depression in the hillside covered by brush and fallen logs. This tunnel was used to help downed Allied airmen escape during the war, James explained as they descended into the darkness. It's fitting that we're using it to escape people who want to suppress the truth about that same war. The tunnel was cramped and muddy, clearly not designed for comfort. They crawled and stumbled through the underground passage for nearly an hour before emerging near a small village that James's contacts had assured them was safe. But as they climbed out of the tunnel, Marcus realized they were not alone. A figure was waiting for them in the shadows, Commander Harrison, accompanied by 2 armed men in civilian clothes. "I must admit, I'm impressed," Harrison said calmly. "You've led us quite a chase. But this ends now." Marcus stepped in front of Eleanor protectively while James raised his hand slowly. "What do you want, Harrison?" Marcus asked. "I want you to understand that you're fighting a battle you can't win," Harrison replied. "The people involved in this conspiracy include some of the most powerful individuals in Europe. They have resources that dwarf anything you can imagine." "So you admit there's a conspiracy?" Marcus challenged. Harrison smiled coldly. "I admit that there are certain historical facts that would be damaging to important people if they became public knowledge. People who contribute significantly to British society and who don't deserve to have their reputations destroyed by ancient history." Eleanor found her voice, anger overcoming her fear. "Ancient history? These are crimes we're talking about. Murder, theft, treason. The families of the victims deserve to know the truth." "The families of the victims are dead," Harrison replied dismissively. "The people who would be hurt by these revelations are very much alive and have done nothing wrong themselves." James stepped forward. "That's where you're wrong, Harrison. Some of these people are still profiting from stolen wealth, still using connections that were built on corruption. They're not innocent victims. They're willing beneficiaries of their families' crimes." Harrison's expression hardened. "Enough philosophy. You have copies of classified documents that threaten national security. You're going to turn over everything you've stolen and submit to debriefing about who else might have seen this material." Marcus laughed bitterly. "National security? Is that what we're calling it when powerful people don't want their dirty secrets exposed?" But even as he spoke, Marcus was calculating their chances of escape. Harrison had only 2 men with him, and they were standing in an open field with multiple directions to run. If they could create a distraction, Eleanor apparently had the same thought. Without warning, she threw herself at Harrison, screaming at the top of her lungs. The unexpected attack caught everyone off guard, and in the confusion that followed, Marcus and James ran in opposite directions. Marcus heard gunshots behind him as he sprinted toward a nearby forest, but he didn't look back. His priority was reaching the village and getting word to their contacts that the evidence needed to be released immediately. Behind him, Eleanor's screams had turned to sobs, and he realized with sick horror that Harrison's men had probably shot James. The elderly former agent had sacrificed himself to give Marcus a chance to escape and ensure that Queen Elizabeth's evidence would reach the world. As Marcus reached the safety of the forest, he pulled out his phone and sent an emergency message to all their contacts. "Compromised. Release everything now. QE's legacy depends on it." Within minutes, news organizations across Europe began receiving packages of documents and photographs that would reshape understanding of World War II and expose corruption that had been hidden for decades. The truth that Queen Elizabeth had died trying to protect was finally being revealed to the world. But Marcus knew that his personal battle was far from over. Harrison's people would hunt him relentlessly, and Eleanor and James had probably paid the ultimate price for helping him. The conspiracy was powerful enough to silence individuals, but could it suppress an international media explosion? As police sirens echoed across the countryside, Marcus disappeared deeper into the forest, carrying with him the weight of Queen Elizabeth's final secret and the determination to ensure that her sacrifice would not be in vain. The most dangerous part of their mission was just beginning, because now the entire conspiracy would be fighting for its survival, and they would stop at nothing to protect themselves. 3 months later, Marcus sat in a secure conference room in Geneva, watching as investigators from 6 different countries presented their findings to an international tribunal. The evidence that Queen Elizabeth had carefully preserved, and that Eleanor had helped him discover, had triggered the largest investigation into wartime corruption in European history. The global media response had been immediate and overwhelming. Within hours of James's contacts releasing the documents, newspapers and television stations across the world were running headlines about the royal conspiracy and the Queen's final secret. The evidence was so comprehensive and well documented that even the most powerful people implicated couldn't deny its authenticity. Marcus had spent the previous months in protective custody, helping investigators understand the context of Queen Elizabeth's research and the modern conspiracy to suppress it. The process had been emotionally draining, especially because he still didn't know the fate of Eleanor and James after that terrible night in the countryside. But today was bringing answers. Sarah Chun, the lead investigator for the International Tribunal, approached Marcus during a break in the proceedings. "I have news about your friends," she said gently. "Eleanor survived. She was shot, but not fatally. She's been in protective custody like you, and she's been providing testimony about Queen Elizabeth's activities at the manor." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. "And James?" Sarah's expression grew sad. "I'm sorry. James Whitmore died that night. But his sacrifice saved your life and ensured that the evidence reached the public. He's being posthumously honored for his service to historical justice." Marcus closed his eyes, mourning the loss of a good man who had given his life to expose the truth. James had understood the importance of their mission and had been willing to pay the ultimate price for it. "What about Harrison and the others?" Marcus asked. "Harrison has been arrested and charged with conspiracy, murder, and obstruction of justice. He's cooperating with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. The network he was part of is being systematically dismantled." Over the following days, the tribunal heard testimony that painted a shocking picture of corruption spanning 8 decades. The evidence Queen Elizabeth had gathered revealed that some of Britain's most respected families had built their wealth on stolen Nazi gold, looted artwork, and collaboration with enemy agents. Eleanor testified via video link from her secure location, describing Queen Elizabeth's final months and her determination to right historical wrongs. Her simple, honest testimony was particularly powerful because she clearly had no personal agenda beyond honoring her former employer's wishes. She said the monarchy's greatest strength had always been its commitment to truth and justice. Eleanor told the tribunal. She couldn't bear the thought that stolen treasures were sitting in private collections while museums and families who had lost everything during the war received nothing. The investigation revealed that Queen Elizabeth had planned to donate the recovered Thornbury collection to museums across Europe, returning stolen artifacts to their rightful owners, or at least ensuring they were accessible to the public. She had also intended to establish a fund to compensate families whose property had been stolen during the war. But, perhaps most importantly, the evidence exposed a network of corruption that extended far beyond wartime crimes. Some of the families implicated in the original conspiracy had continued to use their ill-gotten wealth to influence politics and business throughout the post-war period. The tribunal's final report would eventually lead to criminal charges against 17 people, including 2 sitting members of parliament, a prominent business leader, and several members of the nobility. More than 50 artifacts worth millions of pounds were returned to their rightful owners or donated to public institutions. Commander Harrison, faced with overwhelming evidence of his crimes, eventually provided a detailed confession that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. He had been recruited into the network 15 years earlier when his gambling debts made him vulnerable to blackmail. What started as small favors had gradually escalated to murder when Queen Elizabeth threatened to expose the entire operation. The irony, Marcus reflected to Sarah Chun as they reviewed Harrison's confession, is that Queen Elizabeth wasn't planning to destroy these families. She wanted to find a way to address the historical injustices while allowing people to maintain their dignity. If they had worked with her instead of against her, this could have been handled quietly. Sarah nodded. But they were too afraid of losing their wealth and status to take that risk. Their greed and fear turned a manageable scandal into an international crisis. The most shocking revelation came when investigators analyzed Queen Elizabeth's death more closely. The official cause had been listed as natural causes related to her advanced age, but the tribunal's medical experts found evidence that she had been slowly poisoned with a rare compound that mimicked the symptoms of natural aging and illness. Eleanor's testimony proved crucial in this discovery. She testified that Queen Elizabeth had complained of unusual fatigue and confusion in her final weeks, symptoms that were inconsistent with her normally sharp mental state. More importantly, Eleanor had kept samples of the tea and food that were regularly delivered to the sealed wing of the manor, and forensic analysis revealed traces of the poison. The person responsible for administering the poison was Dr. William Ashford, Queen Elizabeth's personal physician for over 20 years. Ashford had been recruited into the conspiracy when investigators discovered his involvement in an illegal organ transplant ring. Rather than face exposure and imprisonment, he had agreed to slowly poison his most famous patient. Ashford's arrest sent shockwaves through the British medical establishment and raised serious questions about the security protocols surrounding the royal family's healthcare. The scandal would ultimately lead to a complete overhaul of how royal medical care was provided and monitored. As the tribunal concluded its work, Marcus found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had led from a simple security check at a royal estate to the exposure of one of the biggest conspiracies in modern European history. Queen Elizabeth's determination to preserve historical truth had cost her life, but her careful documentation had ensured that the truth would eventually emerge. Eleanor's simple loyalty and courage had been essential in making sure the evidence was discovered and protected. James's sacrifice had guaranteed that the conspiracy couldn't suppress the evidence before it reached the public. The financial impact of the revelations was enormous. Several major corporations saw their stock prices collapse when it was revealed that their founders had built their businesses with stolen wealth. Art auction houses were forced to return paintings and artifacts that had been looted during the war. Insurance companies faced billions in claims from families seeking compensation for stolen property. But beyond the financial implications, the social and political effects were even more significant. The British public was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about some of their most respected institutions and families. Trust in government was shaken when it became clear that officials had been actively covering up historical crimes for decades. Queen Camilla, who had been completely unaware of the conspiracy, publicly apologized on behalf of the royal family and announced a comprehensive review of all royal collections to identify any items that might have been improperly acquired. She also established the Queen Elizabeth Truth and Reconciliation Foundation, dedicated to investigating historical injustices and providing compensation to victims' families. My predecessor understood that the monarchy's legitimacy depends on its commitment to justice and truth, Queen Camilla said in a televised address to the nation. She gave her life to ensure that historical wrongs would be addressed, and we will honor her sacrifice by continuing that work. Marcus was eventually offered a position as the Foundation's chief investigator, a role that would allow him to continue the work that Queen Elizabeth had started. Eleanor was invited to serve as a historical consultant, using her decades of experience caring for royal properties to help identify items that needed further investigation. On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after his first visit to Rayfield Manor, Marcus returned to the estate with Eleanor. The property was now being converted into a museum dedicated to Queen Elizabeth's legacy and the historical discoveries that had emerged from the investigation. The secret chamber beneath the chapel had been preserved exactly as they had found it, and would serve as the centerpiece of an exhibition about wartime resistance and the long struggle for historical justice. Visitors would be able to see the filing cabinets where Queen Elizabeth had stored her research and the hidden safe where she had kept the key to unlocking decades of secrets. She would have been proud of what we accomplished, Eleanor said as they stood in the chamber where their incredible journey had begun. Marcus nodded, looking around at the artifacts and documents that had changed history. She trusted us to do the right thing, and we didn't let her down. The Thornberry collection, now properly cataloged and authenticated, was being displayed in museums across Europe. Families who had given up hope of ever recovering their stolen heirlooms were reunited with precious artifacts that had been lost for over 80 years. Children and grandchildren of Holocaust victims wept as they held items that had belonged to relatives they had never known. But perhaps the most important outcome was the change in how historical crimes were investigated and prosecuted. The International Tribunal had established new protocols for addressing wartime injustices, and similar investigations were being launched in other countries where evidence suggested that stolen wealth had been hidden for decades. Marcus often thought about the moment when Eleanor had first handed him Queen Elizabeth's journal, and how neither of them could have imagined where that discovery would lead. A simple caretaker and a dedicated security officer had managed to expose a conspiracy that had fooled governments and deceived the public for over 80 years. The final report of the International Tribunal ran to over 3,000 pages and became required reading in university courses on ethics, history, and criminal justice. But, for Marcus, the most important conclusion was much simpler. Truth has a way of emerging, even when powerful people try to suppress it. And sometimes the most ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they refuse to give up. Queen Elizabeth's last secret had finally been revealed, and her legacy was secure. The woman who had dedicated her life to serving her country had made one final sacrifice to ensure that justice would prevail over corruption and truth would triumph over conspiracy. As Marcus and Eleanor walked through the gardens of Rayfield Manor for the last time as investigators, they could see tour groups beginning to arrive for the museum's opening day. Children would learn about the importance of preserving historical truth. Adults would understand how corruption can persist across generations, and scholars would continue the work that Queen Elizabeth had started. The royal guard who had stepped into Camilla's estate to investigate strange lights had discovered far more than missing treasures. He had uncovered a legacy of courage, sacrifice, and determination that would inspire future generations to seek truth and justice, no matter how powerful the forces arrayed against them. Queen Elizabeth's final gift to her country was not the treasure that had been hidden in her secret chamber, but the example she had set through her willingness to risk everything for the cause of historical justice. It was a lesson that would echo through the ages, reminding people that even the most carefully guarded secrets cannot remain hidden forever when brave individuals are willing to sacrifice everything to reveal the truth.